As you can see, our profile detail is ready. Okay, now if I click this button here, as you can see, we are going to have a new model. Now let's add this model. So using this model, we can update our profile details. So down here, I'm going to add a new component. Down this model, I'm going to add edit profile. Now let's add this component. So inside this profile, I'm going to add a new component .jsx, and we need to import it here. Okay, now you can see here is our component. Again, we need to have that model in here. So I'm going to open this edit profile and change this to be model. Okay, now we need to have a user hook here, but we are going to receive this from the parent component. It should be edit model and set edit model, because we have a button here. So using this button, we are going to open this model. So I'm going to copy them from here, and inside this profile component, we are going to add a new user hook. I'm going to add them here, and it should be false by default. Okay, now let's set a condition here. So I'm going to set a condition, and if edit model is true, then we are going to print this component here. Now we need to receive this component. So I copy this again. Okay, now you can see we don't have any component, but using this button we should be able to open that model. So in here, I'm going to add an onClick function and set edit. It should be true. Okay, now if I click this button, as you can see, here is our model. The reason we don't have that white background color yet is because we haven't passed this to our model. So I'm going to pass this real quick. Okay, now let's check it again. If I click this button, you can see we have this white background color with this text here. Alright, now let's style it. So I'm going to set this to be true, so you can see this model. Okay, now inside here we are going to have a div, and this div is going to have a class name of center. So we are going to add this class name inside this index.css. So center. So we are going to add this model in the middle of this web page. So position is going to be fixed. Top 50%. Left is going to be 50%. And we need to have transform translate of -50% and -50%. So this code will simply center a div. Okay, and let's add a text here. So I'm going to add here center. Okay, now you can see here is our text, but this text should be on top of our white background color. So for that, at first we need to give it a weight of 95%, and this is for smaller devices, but for devices above MD, the weight should be 45 frame. Okay, it should be weight, and we need to give it a background color of white, MX auto, and again we need to have the shadows class from our CSS file. Okay, margin Y should be 1 rem and Z index to be 20, And finally, we need to have a margin bottom of 3 rem. Okay, now you can see here is our model. Now, as you can see, we need to have this profile information with this icon. So we are going to add them in a separate div. So inside here, I'm going to have a div. So to separate them from each other, we need to use flex, item center, and justify should be between. Now, as you can see inside our model, we have 3 parts. We have the head, the body, and finally we have a footer. So I'm going to comment out here head, body, and finally we have this foot here. Okay, now for this head, we are going to have this text with this icon. I'm going to copy this text from here. So at first we need to have a div. So this div will separate them from each other. We need to add a class name flex, item center, and justify is going to be between. Now let's add this text inside this heading too. We are going to give it a class name of font bold, and text size is going to be XL. Okay, now let's add this icon. I'm going to copy this icon from profile component and just simply add a button here. So down here I'm going to have a button and add this icon here. Okay, so I'm going to give a class name for this, and text size should be XL. Okay, this is our head. As you can see, we need to have some padding for this model. I forget to add this padding here. So in here, I'm going to add a padding of 2 rem, and this should be shadows. So this shadows class name is coming from our index.css, which is here. Okay, now you can see here is our model and it's looking good now. Alright, now let's add our body, which is this part. Now I'm going to add the body inside this section element. Section will get a class name of margin top 6. Now inside here, at first we need to have a paragraph with the class name of padding bottom 3, text size small, and text color should be gray and 500. And this paragraph is for this photo. I just copy this from here and just add it here. Okay, now you can see here is this photo text. We need to have this avatar with this part. So for that, again we need to have another div to separate them from each other. So I'm going to write here class name and flex. We need to add a gap of 2 rem. Okay, now inside here, at first we need to add our image. So our image will go inside a div with the class name of width 5 rem. Okay, now let's add this image. The search is going to be profile.jpg. The alt should be profile image. Okay, now let's add a class name for this. Minimum height is going to be 5 rem. Minimum width is going to be 5 rem also. Okay, and object should be cover. We need to have a border, and border color should be gray and 400. Okay, and finally we need to have a border radius, so rounded should be full. Okay, now you can see here is our avatar. So in the right side we have 2 buttons and this paragraph. Now let's add them. So beside this div we are going to have a fragment. Okay, and inside here I'm going to add a div with the class name of flex. Gap is going to be 4 and text small. This flex is going to separate these 2 buttons from each other. So in here we need to have button. The first button is going to be update, and the second button is going to be remove. Okay, you can see we have these buttons. Now let's add a class name here. So our update button will have a text of green and 600 color, and remove button will have a color of red and 600. Okay, now under this div inside this fragment we are going to have a paragraph. I'm going to copy this paragraph from here and just add it here. So I'm going to have a class name for this. Width should be full for mobile version. For a small version above, width should be 20 rem. Text color should be gray and 500. Text size should be small, and padding top is going to be 2. Okay, and now you can see here is our paragraph, but this should be down here. So for that cause, I'm going to change this fragment to be a div. Now it's looking good. Okay, now as you can see in here, using this button, we should be able to open this file. So we can choose a photo, and if, for example, if I chose this photo in here, you can see this photo should be previewed in here. Now let's work on that. So we have this input. So by default, we want to set this to be hidden. Okay, now we need to have a useref hook. I'm going to name this image ref, and it should be useref. Okay, let's import it from React, and it's gonna be null by default. Now I'm going to pass this useref in this input. So ref is going to be this image ref. Okay, now we need to make a function for this update button. So up here, I'm going to write here const open file, which is equal to this arrow function, and now in here we just write image ref dot current dot click. Okay, and this click is going to be a function. Now let's pass this function to this button, to this update button. I'm going to write here on click and just pass this function. Okay, so now if I click this button, you can see I'm able to see all these images for uploading, but we need to set some validations. So our input should accept only a few document type. So in here I'm going to write accept, and it should be image with the type of JPG, image with the type of PNG, image with the type of JPEG, and this should be image. Okay, now let's check it. As you can see, if I click this button, you can see I won't see any other files except these images. Okay, now when I click this button and click this image, I want this image to be printed in here. So for that I need to have a user hook. So in here I'm going to name this image URL and set image URL, and it's going to be empty string by default. Okay, so now we need to set an onChange for this input. So in here I'm going to define an onChange function. Now we need to get event from here. So set image URL is going to be URL dot create object URL, and we are going to create this object URL using e.target.file, and we are going to get the index 0. Okay, now I just copy this variable from here, and inside this image we need to set a condition. So I'm going to delete this from here. So if there is image URL, then we are going to print this image URL, otherwise we want this profile image to be here. Okay, so now if I refresh the page, you can see by default we have this profile image, but if I click this button and select this image, now you can see we have this image in here. We have some CSS problems here. Now let's fix it. So in here I just forget this dash. As you can see, I forget to add this dash in here, so make sure to add it. Now you can see our image is in the right place. Alright, now let's see what else we have. You can see we have two inputs and two labels in here, and also two buttons. Now let's add them. We are going to have another section, and this time we are going to add a class name of padding top should be 1 rem, and text size is going to be small. Okay, now inside here at first we need to have a label. So label, and the text is going to be name with this star. Okay, and also we need to have an input with the type of text, and placeholder should be username. It should be username. Okay, you can see we have the label and this input here. So in here for this label I'm going to add a class name of padding bottom 3, and this should be block to take the entire class. Okay, now you can see they are on top of each other. Now let's style this input here. I'm going to add a class name for this. Padding should be 1. We need to give it a border bottom. Border color should be black. We need to give it a full width, and outline should be none. Okay, this is our input. It's looking good. And also we need to write a maximum length for this input. So following that, I'm going to write maximum length should be 50 characters. So the user cannot type more than 50 letters inside this input. Okay, now let's add this paragraph down here. So down this input I'm going to add a paragraph, and we need to give it a class name here. Okay, text size should be small, and text color should be gray and 600. And finally we need to add a little padding top of 2. Okay, now you can see it's the same as this one. Now let's add the second one. I just copy this all from here and add them down here. Okay, I just change this to be bio, and this one should be bio also. Now you can see we have them here. So I'm going to copy this text from here and add it inside this paragraph. As you can see, we need to have a little padding top here. So I just copy this from here and add inside section. Okay, and for this section I'm going to give a padding top of 1 rem, and also text size should be small. Alright, now you can see they are in the right place. And finally we need to have two buttons here. So at first we need to add a div, a parent div for them. So we are going to add a div here, and this div will have a class name of flex item center. Okay, item center, and justify should be end, because we are going to push these two buttons to the end of this form here, I mean to the right side. And we need to have a little gap between the buttons here, and padding top should be 2 rem. Okay, now let's add those buttons. The first button text is going to be cancel, and the second one is going to be save. Okay, now you can see we have these buttons. So we just add styling here, I'm going to add a class name for this button here. Okay, we need to have a border here for this console button, and border color should be green and 600. We need to have padding y of 2, padding x should be 5, and rounded full. We need to add text color should be green and 600. Okay, now you can see this is our button, and the second button will have the same class name, so I don't want to rewrite it. I just store this inside a variable, so I'm going to copy this from here. I'm going to have a new variable const, and I'm going to name this button, okay, and add it here. Okay, now I can add this button. Instead of this double quote, I'm going to have this curly braces and add this here. Okay, but as you can see, our second button will have a background color, so I just copy this button from here and add this temporary string. We need to add this inside this curly braces again, and following that we need to have a background color of green and 800, and also we need to change the text to be white. Okay, now you can see they are looking the same. Alright guys, we are done with this form. Now let's close this form. Okay, so up here, as you can see, we have this set edit model. I'm going to copy this from here, and we need to find that icon, which is this one, and in here I'm going to set an onClick, this arrow function, and set edit model to be false. Okay, now if I click this button, you can see I will be able to close this model. Now let's change this edit model to be false by default. So in here, as you can see, it is true. We need to change this to be false. If I refresh the page, now you can see we don't have that model, but if I click this button, you can see I am able to open this. Alright guys, I made two mistakes here. So this form is not belong to the footer. I'm going to change this to be profile edit form. Okay, and our form part will be belong to these two buttons. So I'm going to name this foot, and also I haven't changed this maximum length. As you can see in here, the maximum length should be 160 characters, so I'm going to change this to be 160.